Hello, my friends. Welcome to our review today of project management. Today, we are going in on the predictive piece of project management because lots of you are still trying to wrap your head around that page that breaks down all the knowledge areas and process groups. So we're going to go through all of the 49, but I'm going to give you practical illustrations of what exactly each process is. So on the screen, we have a camera feed to keep you focused on our topic at hand. The project is a building a home, building a two-story structure, three-story structure. That's the general theme. So I'll always refer to the theme as I go through the content with you. So I want you to imagine you are about to embark on an endeavor to build a house. You first start off with the concept of initiating the project. And on the screen here, you can see I have a project charter just above me. The project charter is the document that authorizes the project. It authorizes the project manager to apply resources to the project. And this is the very beginning of the project. Project management is broken down as follows. You have 5 process groups: initiating, planning, executing, monitoring and controlling, and closing. And then you have 10 areas of knowledge, as you can see on the screen here as well. You can see the breakdown of the 10 areas of knowledge. Let's make that a little bit bigger. This is the landscape. This is the lay of the land. This is what you need to understand to be able to put all the pieces together. And by the time we are done today, my friend, we would have covered everything to put you on the right trajectory to understand this, not just to cram it, not to memorize it, but to understand this. So let's jump straight into the very beginning. We are going into the initiating process group. As the word initiating implies, this is an authorization. It is the beginning of the project. And this is where you create the document that I'm showing you on the screen right now. This is a project charter. If you look at the details, you can see that there's a project sponsor, a project manager is also named on the document. You can also see the date and the project customer, and this has got high-level information. It's got a high-level project purpose, high-level project description, high-level requirements, and so on. Many organizations have their own slant towards how they do this, but ultimately a project charter will be created. So let's hone in on the process. It's called Develop Project Charter. Develop Project Charter is where you are developing this document that you see on the screen. Now, as you see here in the text on the screen, it reads, Develop Project Charter, authorizing the project with a project charter. That is the project charter. I encourage you to not be sidetracked with anything else other than the high-level description of the process. Authorizing the project with a project charter. That is enough. So if we were embarking on building a 2-story structure or a 1-story home, we would need a project charter that says, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, here are the high-level requirements, here's the high-level scope, the high-level milestones, so on and so forth. Very straightforward. You could also have the key stakeholders listed in this document, as you can see there. Now, let's scroll to the very next process. The very next process is the identification of stakeholders. And as you can see here, we have another document. This is a stakeholder register. So we're shifting gears from the development of the project charter to the identification of stakeholders. So let's hone in on this one as well. What does it read? Identifying who the project could affect and who could affect the project. And one of the best ways to do this, my friends, is to create a stakeholder register. Right here on the screen, and I'm going to zoom in so you can see it really well. You can see we have a stakeholder register with the name of the stakeholder, the position of the stakeholder, the company they are affiliated with, their contact information, the role, the requirement, expectation, influence, interest, and other information. This is generally what is captured in a stakeholder register. It is as simple as that, my friends. I am not going to complicate this for you because I could by opening up several books and going through paragraphs and paragraphs, but that's not what you're after. What you're after is embracing the information and understanding it at a high level to create a foundation. Later on, you could build additional content on top of what we're doing today. But don't open that book. Don't open that book. Process Groups, a practice guide, don't open the book. PMBOK 6, don't open the book. Stay with me, okay? This is the long game I was talking about. We're going for the long haul, okay? So now you understand the identify stakeholders process at the sufficient level. Let's move on to our next process group. The next process group is the planning process group. And moving into planning, the very first process is called Develop Project Management Plan. So let me show you this. The Develop Project Management Plan process works on assembling a number of tiny little plans. They may not be as tiny, maybe they're big, but we call them subsidiary plans. The idea is to assemble all the subsidiary plans into something that looks like this. And this, at the end of planning, will contain the information I'm about to show you. You can see it has scope, schedule, cost, quality, resources, communications, risk, procurement, and stakeholder-related information. So every one of those areas, as you can see, has a section in this document. Now, let me explain this a little bit differently because it is important that you put this in context. To put it in context, let us open up that infamous page one more time that has those processes, all of them. So, if you take a look here, my friends, we have Develop Project Management Plan. This is a roll-up of everything we're going to be looking at from here to the end of planning. And it is going to go rather quick. I know right now we're going a little bit on the slow side because I'm really making it slow to get your roots to really sink into that soil and get these concepts. But we're going to be going a lot quicker in a minute. Okay, so everything we're going to be covering from here on out is a roll up. The idea is to roll all of these outputs from these processes up into the document that I have been showing you, the project management plan that you see on the screen there. Okay, now let's go step by step into what exactly happens every step of the way. So there are going to be some things I can show you on the screen, and there are going to be some things that I may not be able to show you, but I will speak to them. Okay? So as far as the very next process, we are going to the scope knowledge area. And one of the first things we do, as you can see over there, is called plan scope management. So let's go on to the next process, plan scope management. Plan scope management, creating a plan for how to define and manage scope and prevent scope creep. So taking a look at this document that I showed you, project management plan, within here we have that subsidiary plan for scope, the scope management plan. You can see it says here, insert the project scope management plan or provide a reference where it is stored. So the idea is to have a plan. How are we going to define the scope? How are we going to manage it? How are we going to make sure everyone is on the same page? So that's plan scope management in a nutshell. After plan scope management, the next thing that happens is we collect requirements. How do we collect requirements? Well, there's a document that I have here. I'm going to show it to you in a second. Collecting requirements can be done using what we call requirements documentation, which is a document that captures the requirements in a way that helps the business understand what exactly the requirements are going to do for them, right? How do the requirements meet the business needs? And then we also have a document known as a requirements traceability matrix. This, as you can see, is just a matrix. It's a matrix that tracks requirements to their origin. So if we zoom in, you can see we have source. That is the origin. Where is it from? And over here on the left, we have the requirement. So this document tracks the requirements to their origin. The requirements documentation helps us understand how the requirements meet the need of the business. Okay? And that's collect requirements. Let's move on to our next process. The next process here is called define scope. And define scope is defining project inclusions, exclusions, deliverable description, and acceptance criteria in a project scope statement. Again, I have a document that could help you understand what goes on here. As you can see on the screen, you can see project scope statement. We have the product scope elaborated, project deliverables elaborated, exclusions, acceptance criteria. Now, when it comes to these two down here, the PMI made an adjustment after I told them, looks like we got an error in the PMBOK guide. They took out the mention of constraints and assumptions. So you want to check your version of the PMBOK 6 or process groups or practice guide and make sure that it does not reference constraints and assumptions. Because when I did tell them, they corrected it. And it should not be in subsequent editions after the date I reported it and it was fixed. You might recall that these constraints and assumptions are documented as part of what we call an assumption log, and that is first developed in initiating as part of the develop project charter process. But more on that later. Our work is done in define scope. Inclusions, exclusions, deliverable description, acceptance criteria. That's it. Let's move on to the next one. The next process is called create WBS, create work breakdown structure. It's creating a work breakdown structure, which is a visual hierarchical breakdown of the project work. It involves clearly identifying what is involved in various levels, just like a family tree. Now, if you haven't seen a WBS, I want you to Google it. A WBS just looks like a family tree, like an organization breakdown structure. It has that same tree structure, but it's a really helpful tool in identifying what is the project about, making sure that it is well elaborated and broken down. The process again, create work breakdown structure. Let's take a look at an example on our screen here. So right over here, if we are able to zoom in a little bit more into that, there's a WBS. And you get the general idea of the breakdown. It looks like a family tree. It tapers up into sometimes several layers, but that's the general idea. It just shows you how the work is broken down from the top level, which is the project level, all the way down to what we call the work package level. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on. What happens after you create the WBS? Well, after creating the WBS, you move into the next knowledge area. That's right. I didn't say the next process. No. That's pretty much it for scope. So we're going into what happens in the next area called schedule management. So after you create your work breakdown structure, you get into plan, schedule management. Now these plan something management processes often throw people off. And I think the reason is they're not really processing what the process is about. Every process that says plan X management, where X is a knowledge area, all you're doing is saying, how are we going to carry out that process? What exactly are we going to do? So give it some thought. What would you expect to do in plan schedule management? Well, I'll tell you, you can expect to have a plan that outlines the scheduling tool to use, who is going to be doing the scheduling, when are they going to be doing the scheduling, what are some of the rules and parameters that need to be followed as far as the scheduling is concerned. Now, I'm going to show you, going back to the very beginning of planning, when I showed you the project management plan. You may have caught it, but there's a section there. Insert the project schedule or provide a reference to where it is stored. You also have the concept of milestones talked about, and at a higher level going back, it says, and I'm going to zoom in there so that you got a good picture of it. Let's go into that. And you can see it says, example of schedule management approach. Establish a baseline within the first 2 weeks of the project and monitor progress against the baseline on a weekly basis. The project manager will be responsible for ensuring the project schedule is updated with the latest information and never more than 3 business days out of date. For variances on executive milestones greater than 10%, the project may choose to use guidance specified by, this is internal to the agency that created this, which is a CDC. See the CDC up project schedule document for more guidance. So this is a schedule management plan, which is a section within your project management plan. And that's what you do in plan schedule management. It's that simple. You decide, how are we going to manage the schedule? How are we going to develop the schedule? Let's move on to our next one. The next process here is called define activities. Define activities, as the name implies, creating a list of all the things to be done on the project. So what would that look like? I'll show you an example. An activity list is one of the outputs, and an activity list, as you're about to see, is a list of the activities being done on the project. So there's a WBS dictionary which goes along with the WBS, and here we are in activity list. So in this example, you can see we've got a list of the activities. So like I said, think about a house building project. What are some of the activities you would expect? Use your imagination. Those are things that could exist here in an activity list. We also have activity attributes, which further define the activity. Let's hone in on this for a second. So we have an activity ID, right? That's the activity. We've got the activity name, in this case, conduct market research. We've got the WBS ID that activity is linked to. And then we have a description of the activity. We have responsibility, resource requirement, predecessors, successors, activity type, location, assumption, constraint, relationship, and it goes on and on. This is going to help you better understand the activity. That is what an activity list is. The final things that we have here in define activities, when all is said and done, we should also have a milestone list, a list of the higher level milestones. We could, in some instances, decide to define them, or it could just be a simple list. And that's what we do in define activities. Now, to give you further clarity on the topic of scheduling, we are going to take a look at what a schedule for a construction project could look like. And I'm going to show you a couple of examples here. The very first example that you can see here on the screen is Smartsheet. Smartsheet is a scheduling tool, and as you can see, it has just helped us put all of the tasks together. We can see a list of everything that's going to be done. That is an activity list. When we get the list of activities, we've got to sequence the activities and put them in the logical order of occurrence, and that's where these predecessors come in. And ultimately, you will get to this point where you have a breakdown of all the tasks, and then you got a breakdown of the start date, the end date, and you got a fancy Gantt chart to show for it as well. This, my friends, is the level that you need to get to in understanding schedules really well. Let's take a look at a different schedule that was built in Microsoft Project, which is more of the gold standard, if you wanted to call it that, because you do know that in the world of project management, the very first of the scheduling tools that was used by a ton of companies is Microsoft Project. That's right, MS Project. So let's take a look at this one over here. And here you can see our Microsoft Project example. You can see it's a construction project. All of these tasks, the durations, the start and finish dates, the predecessors, resources that have been assigned, and the list goes on. But I don't want you to forget that this is something you should probably address after you get certified if you're not already really good at it. I'm hoping that you put this on your radar and you decide to look into Microsoft Project, because it really is a brilliant tool to help project managers schedule and keep track of what they're doing on their projects. Okay? If you are enjoying this video, my friends, please hit like and subscribe to the channel so that you get notified of when there's more content like this. I also want you to leave a comment. Let me know if there's anything that you're looking to learn that you haven't. And I also want you to share this with a friend so that your friends know that this information is out there and can help them. All right, so I've shown you a couple of ideas about the schedule. We looked at Smartsheet and we looked at MS Project. Okay. So now you got a good idea about what that looks like. Let's jump back in to the topic of schedule management. So now we're going into the processes that we've already looked at within our Microsoft Project schedule. So we define the activities, and that is creating a list of all the things to be done on the project. This is what we did in Microsoft Project, right? Define the activities. Next, we sequence the activities. We put them in the logical order of occurrence. It says arranging the tasks, the list of tasks, in order of what needs to be done first and next, and also factoring in task dependencies. The next thing that happens is the process known as estimate activity durations. And what we're doing here is estimating how long each activity will take based on the available resources, task relationships, constraints, and assumptions. So let's backtrack for a second. We started off with plan schedule management, then define activities, then sequence activities, and now estimate activity durations. How long will each activity take? And after estimate activity durations, we have develop schedule. Compiling all the processed information into a final approved schedule with all start and finish dates or times clearly defined. So you have your project schedule, in this example in Microsoft Project. And that is what we do in schedule management. Now on the left hand side I have the milestone list, but next we're going into the topic of cost management. So let's jump straight back in and let's go over to cost management. The very first thing we do is we plan cost management. So let's go there. Plan cost management. And as you can see here on the screen, it reads, creating a plan for how to estimate project costs, determine the final project budget, and control expenditures against that budget. So we're creating a plan to be able to do all these things, a plan for how to estimate cost, a plan for how to determine the budget, a plan for how to control expenditures against that budget. That's what we're doing. Okay. Now there's a journey to get there. We first of all estimate costs. As you can see on the screen, we have some activity cost estimates. Let's zoom in so that you get a better view of that. It's just a table and it has resource costs. We've computed everything as far as who's working on what they're doing. So use your imagination for this, please. So we estimate cost, right? And that takes us to our next process, right? So we plan cost management, but the next thing we do after that is to estimate cost in the way I showed you right here on the screen, right? So you can see activity cost estimates. When you are done estimating, whether you're using parametric or bottom up, 3-point, whatever way you're doing it, you then roll up all of the estimates into a final total amount. We call that a cost baseline when it is approved. So we estimate costs, and the next thing that happens is we roll it all up and we call that determine budget. So here it says aggregating all project cost estimates to determine the total project budget. It's that simple. Okay. So you got all of these estimates, you roll those up into a final total amount. Now we're going to jump into the next area because we're done with cost. We're moving into the topic of quality. And the very first one says plan quality management. What are we doing here? We're creating a plan that identifies quality standards to be met and how to meet those standards on the project. So here we have a quality management plan. You can see this quality management plan has broken down what quality management approaches will be used, quality standards and requirements, roles, responsibilities, QA, QA record, QC, and QC record. And we could go on and on. The other thing that you do in plan quality management is you compile a list of the relevant metrics that you will be measuring on the project. So in this construction example, it could be that you are measuring something that is structure related. Okay? And that is plan quality management. You're not measuring just yet. Remember, you're identifying the standards and the metrics that are most relevant. Let's move on. So after plan quality management, the next process is plan resource management. And it says on the screen here, planning how to estimate and acquire resources, how to develop and manage the project team, and control physical resources. Did you get that? It is a planning. Planning how are we going to do this? How are we going to get this aspect of the project done? Okay, so in this one, we're saying planning how to estimate and acquire resources, how to develop and manage the project team, and control physical resources. You see, it only refers to physical resources under the controlling aspect. So when you hear control resources, we're not talking about people, we're talking about the physical resources. So let's go a little bit deeper into this conversation. Right here, I have a reminder of some of the things we do. We think about the resources needed, and we capture that in our resource management plan. That's the word. It's not just called a human resource management plan. It's called a resource management plan because there could be plans for all manner of resources in this. So this needs a little bit of a tweak. Okay. And the other thing that you do as part of plan resource management is you think about the team charter. There could be a team charter that you're putting together, that you're working on, and it could be one of the outputs of this process. The next process in this resource area is called estimate activity resources. And this is where you're estimating how many resources do we need, how many, how much. What is the category? What is the experience level of the individuals we're looking to hire? That would be some of the conversations that you have here. Okay. I hope you're following along. If there are questions, just ask as they come up. And next we have plan communications management. And plan communications management, as you've probably already guessed, we are going to have a plan. And the plan is a communications management plan, as you can see there. Now, what is in the communications management plan? Well, you might recall that this is a plan for how to communicate, what to communicate, why and when. I call it the 5 W's and the H. It's the what, the when, the where, the why, the who, and the how. So there's a lot of content that you can have in such a plan, communications management plan. Highly advise you to take a look at some of the more intricate details. For example, we have a flow chart of information flow in the communications management plan. We also have a glossary of common terminology. These are some of the things that you can expect to see in this plan. Okay. So again, anchor your thinking back to what we're doing. we are building, right? We want to make sure that we are on the same page with our stakeholders. So we need to plan how to communicate. It's that simple. All right, let's move on. The next thing we think about here is risk management. And the process is called plan risk management. And it reads, creating a plan for how to identify, analyze, monitor, and control project risks. So you are really thinking categorically about uncertainty that can impact the project. Because what is a risk? It's an uncertain event that can impact the project positively or negatively. So we create a plan that guides us. And there's a plan. Right there. A risk management plan. Okay. Let's zoom in. So we got the risk management procedure and approaches, risk identification, and risk prioritization and analysis. And that's your risk management plan. Okay. Your risk management plan is going to guide you how do we manage risks on the project, on this construction project. Okay. Remember, there are many parameters on a project like this, many things that need to be taken note of, many things that need to be documented and rechecked. And as a good project manager, you should just be intentional about how you manage risk. It's that simple. Okay? All right. So now we're done with plan risk management. I'm going to show you here a risk register. Let's take a look at our risk register right there on the screen. You see that there? Our risk register is a place that we capture risks as we identify them. So you identify the risks, and then you begin putting more information about the risks in there. So we have the risk itself, the cause, and the effect. So you have this cause, risk, effect model to identify the risks. And then we carry out a qualitative risk analysis. Let's zoom in a little bit. You can see right here, we have a qualitative risk analysis. We have the probability rating, the impact rating. We multiply that to get the risk score. And then we move into a quantitative risk analysis. And here you can see we've got the risk probability percent. We've got the impact in dollars. And then we have the risk magnitude, or EMV, if you will. Because what we've done is we've multiplied risk probability times risk impact in dollars, and we have our risk magnitude in dollars as well. And when you add up all the risk magnitudes, this shows you the overall exposure on the entire project. Now, I should say this is putting it into pretty layman's terms and showing you a rather simplistic idea of the concept, but in actuality, there's a lot more. You could go on down to any of those websites, such as palisade.com, PALISADE, where you can see Monte Carlos in action and the fancy stuff that happens in more advanced risk management. Moving on here, we can see we've got the plan risk responses process, and this is where we plan how to effectively respond to the risks. So my friends, let's go back and put some coats of paint on what we started. So we talked about plan risk management. Then we talked about identify risks, identifying both positive and negative risks that could affect the project, and documenting this into a risk register to be monitored throughout the project. Then we have performed qualitative risk analysis, which I showed you. Probability rating times impact rating, we get a risk score that helps us to better prioritize the risks, better rank them, right? So we perform a qualitative risk analysis determining how the risks are. Are they high, medium, low? How probable are they to occur, and when? All right. I hope you're following along. Let's move on to the next process, which we have actually talked about, and that is performing a quantitative risk analysis. So again, the probability in percent, the impact in dollars. You multiply both, you get an EMV, expected monetary value. Okay. Moving along. Next thing is the process known as plan risk responses. And this is planning how we're going to respond to the risk. Are we going to accept, transfer, avoid? We're going to escalate. Are we going to mitigate? You decide. How is the best way to approach these risks, to tackle these risks? Now, I've shown you this breakdown, which we call a risk register. So you should have a solid idea about that. Moving on. In addition to negative risks, we have positive risks. And the positive risk also have their own strategy. And I call it the EASEE mnemonic. So you have exploit, you have escalate and enhance. But you also have accept and you have share. And if you can remember that, then you remember the EASEE, EASEE, easy. And that's a mnemonic for the positive risks. But a mnemonic for the negative risks is ATEAM, ATEAM. And that helps you remember the strategies. Again, avoid, transfer, escalate, accept, mitigate. All right, my friends, we are gaining ground and we're moving pretty expediently. Not too quick, but just good enough for you to move swiftly through the material. So the next area we're going to talk about is procurement. And I got to remind you, when all is said and done, the big question is, are we going to make or buy? Okay. And on the screen here, I have an example of a procurement management plan. Plan procurement management is where we are conducting a make or buy analysis and creating a plan for how to procure needed goods or services and how to manage selected sellers. So think about it. It's a construction project. There's a lot of things we're looking to do, and we need to have a method to the madness. How are we going to get the vendors and the sellers, the suppliers, the people we need? What are we going to do? How are we going to pull this off? That needs to be the question. So you're going to do a make or buy analysis, and you're going to arrive at a make or buy decision, whether to make or to buy. Based on that, you will then take further action to find a seller or sellers. But that happens in executing. We're just one away from finishing planning. Let's move on to the final one. It's called plan stakeholder engagement. What exactly are we doing here? Creating a plan for how to engage stakeholders and optimally control their engagement. Think about that. Creating a plan for how to engage stakeholders and optimally control the engagement. Now, the word control may be a little bit on the harsher side. We could soften it and say you're really monitoring, but you can actually steer things in some instances in a certain direction, and that's what we mean by control. You're not controlling the stakeholder, you are controlling, steering the engagement in the right direction. So the word could be monitor, but you also need to think about the action you're taking, right? So the bottom line is a plan. And what does this plan look like? I'm going to show you right now. The plan for stakeholder engagement could look something like this. This is a very simple plan. As you can see here, we have the name of the stakeholder. We have their level of influence, their impact assessment. We have the engagement strategies. How are we going to engage these stakeholders? Remember, this is a building project, so you could have different entities depending on the building. You could have the city, You can have individual homeowners, stuff like that. Okay. We have come to the end of the very second process group, which is planning. So we've taken a look at initiating. Now we've taken a look at planning. Next, we're going in on executing. So now we're done with everything that is in the planning process group. We're moving in to the executing process group. The very first process in executing is called direct and manage project work. Let's take a look at what this is all about. It says the mission is to execute the work in the project management plan. It really is that simple. It's carrying out the work that exists in the project management plan. Now, the question I typically get is, okay, Phil, what documents do we use for this? I'm going to give you some context and some ideas of what you could use in this process. You could use an issue log. An issue log is just a log of issues, a log of what we are experiencing on the project by way of issues. And it's also the process, this direct and managed project work, where you create the deliverable for the project. So whatever that final deliverable is, in our example, we've been talking construction. So this would be where you create that build, whatever that build is. This is where it all comes together, theoretically speaking, even though it would be something that happens over time. So just keep that in mind. Let's move on to the next process. The next process here is manage project knowledge. And manage project knowledge is where you compile lessons learned. In other words, what went well, what didn't go so well. The mission is to use existing knowledge, create knowledge, share opportunities or forums, and create new knowledge to accomplish the project objectives while contributing to organizational learning. Let's go to our next one. The next one here is called manage quality. What are we doing here? We are assuring stakeholders that the work is being performed as planned. That takes us to the next one, acquire resources. What are we doing here? Acquiring resources and selecting project team members. Next, we move into developing the team, building the team through training, coaching, team building, and great interpersonal skills, great team skills. Let's move to our next one. The next process is manage team. It's a no-brainer. This is leading the team. So even though it says manage, just lean on the saying, we lead people, we manage things, right? So this is really more of a leadership job. It's one of feedback. It's one of inspiring the team. It's leading and guiding the team to success. Let's move on to our next area. After manage team, the next thing we should be thinking about is called manage communications. So let's go on to manage communications. We've talked about manage team, and there's manage communications. And as you can see on the screen, it says communicate with stakeholders and team members through sending out reports and other means of communication. So it's going to be on a case-by-case basis as far as how you would communicate. We communicate differently on projects. It really depends on a number of things. But whatever you've decided to do to communicate, this is where you just do it. You just do the communications. All right, let's move on. After managed communications, after you have ensured that you follow the plan to communicate, the next thing we talk about is implement risk responses. What exactly is implement risk responses? As simple as it sounds, a lot of folks can't believe how simple the PMBOK guide is. This is really just carrying out the responses that you said you would during the plan risk responses process. It really is that simple. So, plan risk responses, we talked about the easy mnemonic, and then we talked about the A-team. Well, this is where you would carry it out. Okay? Implement risk responses. All right, let's move on. We're making good headway here. The next process we talk about is conduct procurements. And what does this say? It reads, selecting sellers through a formal process. And this is the overarching thing you're looking to do. You're looking to select a seller or sellers, right? And you award a contract, and when the contract is awarded, they know what they're meant to do. They go off and get it done. And that's it. That's simple. All right. Let's move on. So, conduct procurements. The final thing that happens in executing is called manage stakeholder engagement. And as it reads here, manage stakeholder engagement as previously planned. This is where you are communicating with stakeholders and working with them in order to get the engagement that you are seeking. This is carrying out the engagement plan to engage those stakeholders. And again, we have gotten to another final step in this journey for this process group of executing. We're moving into the next process group. The next process group is called the monitoring and controlling process group. The very first thing that happens, we call it monitor and control project work, and it's monitoring and controlling the entire project and creating work performance reports. The next thing that happens is performing a grade change control. It's reviewing and approving or rejecting project change requests. The body responsible is known as the Change Control Board. So you send change requests to the CCB. After you've done an impact analysis on them, the CCB takes a look at your impact analysis as a project manager, takes a look at the change request from their own perspective, and they decide a yay or nay. Let's go forward with it, let's do it, or let's reject it. The next process here is validate scope. This is from the scope knowledge area, and this is the customer or key stakeholder validating that the deliverables meet their requirements through deliverable inspection. Let's move on to our next one. The next one is control scope, and this is just controlling the project scope, preventing scope creep and gold plating. It says controlling project scope to the agreed upon scope baseline by preventing scope creep and gold plating. That's it. What is scope creep? Scope creep can be looked at as the parent term. Gold plating is a child. So scope creep is when scope that was not originally defined creeps into the project and it ends up getting done without going through proper authorization channels. Now, you could probably get there because team members are gold plating. They have an idea, they don't run it through anyone, they just start working it. That's one way that gold plating can happen. But the second way that scope creep can happen is is not gold plating, it's nickeling and nibbling. I should say nibbling. Nibbling is when you ask for more and more tiny little bits and pieces until when you add it all up, you're like, wow, we just gave away their whole company. They asked us for little bits consistently. So you want to be aware of nibbling, and you also want to be aware of the Superman syndrome, people just wanting to do more. So as a project manager controlling scope, be aware of that. Next one, control schedule. Same vein, controlling the schedule by preventing delays and analyzing the impact of changes on the schedule. Just don't let the schedule go off course. The next one is earned value management, baked into this larger topic of control cost. And the reason why this earned value management is standing out is because we've got a bunch of formulas here that you could face on the exam. And I'm just going to call them out very quickly. You can have formulas on the schedule performance index or the schedule variance and the cost performance index or the cost variance. And I'm putting them here as a reminder so that you go look for my videos where I cover these. But at a high level for this process, control cost, this is about controlling costs by preventing cost overruns. Moving on, we have control quality. And this is where you're checking the final deliverable internally and ensuring that it meets the customer's requirements before sending it to the customer. So this is what you are doing, and you're checking to make sure that this is what the customer would like. All right, moving on here. After control quality, we're going into control resources. Remember what I said, this is only about the physical resources. So it's ensuring resources are available to be used as planned while monitoring project resource usage. Moving on, my friends. Next one is monitor communications. You notice we don't use the word control, softer word communications, monitor communications, modifying any communications plan aspects that are not working. It's really just checking, asking, is our plan working or is it not? It's working for us, good. Let's continue doing great things. If not, let's tweak it to adjust accordingly. All right, the next thing we have here is monitor risks, and this is where we are keeping track of risks and checking the effectiveness of our risk response plans. Do you notice how easy I'm making it? I'm making it really dumbed down for a reason. I'm talking pretty slow. I know some of my viewers are not first, speakers in the English language, so I hope this helps. If you need more speed, just hit that speed button, but I really want to make sure that everyone understands and gets it. That's my goal with all of this. All right, so keeping track of the risks and checking the effectiveness of risk response plans. Moving on, we get to control procurement. It's changing any ineffective plan aspects and ensuring the seller is performing as promised. It's also about closing contracts with vendors or subcontractors. Let's move on to our last one in this area. So after control procurements, we have monitor stakeholder engagement, and it's checking the plan for how to manage stakeholders, modifying the plan as needed, and of course, observing the world of stakeholder engagement around you. Are you engaging your stakeholders properly? How do you know that? You could do a questionnaire, a survey, you could do a net promoter score. There are many things you could do, but the bottom line is from this process, you're walking away with an understanding of how well are we doing in our stakeholder engagement. All right. Moving on to the final process. I know you thought I was going to go into maybe 2 hours. No, I said 1 hour, and here we are. So this is closing. The major thing you're doing here is either closing out the project or phase in the project. You're closing out, you're collecting lessons learned, you're collating lessons learned, and you're helping those on the project understand through a final report what results did we achieve, what can we conclude about this project, so on and so forth. Okay? I hope you enjoyed this, my friends, and if you need help with your PMP exam prep, I want to encourage you to go on down to the website. It's called Praizion.com. At Praizion.com, we have training, coaching, development to help you far beyond this episode. All right? So go on down to Praizion.com. That's www.praizion.com. And we look forward to helping you, assisting you in your project management journey. Thank you. You take care. Bye for now. Oh, and one last thing. If you are specifically looking for my signature half-day boot camp, go on down to hpmexam.com. We've got a lovely boot camp there for you. I tell you, it's a steal. Thank you for joining me. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and share with your friends. Take care, my friends. Bye for now.